Hello, and welcome to the Full Circle Podcast, your source for insights into the science and art of endurance sports training and racing. I'm your host, Coach Laura Henry. Today is Coach Tip Tuesday. Last week, we talked about how disappointment on race day can lead to greater success for endurance athletes. When things go wrong or they miss achieving their goals, athletes have a tendency to ask questions, to analyze their performances, and to look at possible changes to their approach to training. But do athletes demonstrate that same reflection and thoughtfulness when things go well? This week, I'm going to ask the same question that I asked last week. But this week, there's a different intention behind it. What if everything does go perfectly? Over the years, I've watched athletes take race days that go well for granted. Understandably, they get swept up in the emotions of the day and they ride the high that comes from a goal achieved and a job well done. They don't often stop to reflect, look for lessons, or wonder about exactly why things went well. The athletes are just happy that they did go well. As amazing as these great performances feel, it's important not to let our emotions mislead us into thinking that there's nothing else we need to do or that we can do once we achieve a goal. I've seen time and time again how important it is to look at the good days just as carefully as we analyze the disappointing ones. When we consider the question, what if everything does go perfectly? If that perfect day does come to pass, we also need to ask ourselves, why did everything go perfectly? When reflecting on and analyzing a good race day performance, there are some important questions to ask. What went well? What specific things on race day contributed to the race going well? What specific things in training contributed to the race going well? What didn't you do on race day that contributed to the race going well? What didn't you do in training that contributed to the race going well? What, if any, changes did you make in training that contributed to the race going well? Did you get lucky? And did you get away with something, either in training or on race day itself? Was there anything you could have done better in training? Was there anything you could have done better on race day? Is there anything you can or would change in the future? What goals do you have for the future? What are you willing to do in training moving forward to accomplish future goals? A successful race day doesn't ever happen because of one single thing. Rather, a successful race day is the culmination of an infinite number of little things that add up to yield a positive outcome. Consciously seeking to understand what most, if not all, of those little things are is the key to being able to have more than one successful race day. As such, actually listing out the things that went well, both in the training leading into race day and on race day itself, is an important practice. Maintaining a good training log can help facilitate this reflection, as it allows athletes to easily go back and review what they did in training and what they felt about it via both their training files and via their subjective post-workout notes. Try as we might, we will never actually remember all of the details of what happened in training. We need to write them down for our future selves to reflect back on. This process of reviewing well-kept training logs allows you to hone in on exactly what went well and why it worked, which leads you to being able to leverage this knowledge moving forward. You'll also be able to ascertain whether there were patterns of things happening in training that contributed to your success. I've learned that virtually nothing happens by chance. We are almost always successful because of choices we make, behaviors we engage in, and skills we develop, not in spite of them. Unfortunately, sometimes when we are successful, we paradoxically start to disengage from the very behaviors, habits, and choices that led to our success in the first place. We, often unconsciously, devalue them, and/or we think that we don't need them anymore. For instance, how many times have you thought, I'm feeling good, I don't need to do insert thing here, or I can skip that insert thing here. This is true for big things such as hydration, sleep, and consistency, but it is especially true of seemingly small and insignificant supporting behaviors such as stretching, proper warm-ups and cool-downs, and recovery habits. The things that led us to success can help us keep being successful. As such, thoughtfully considering and identifying exactly which things in our training and racing led to our success helps us continue them moving forward so we can give ourselves a higher probability of continued success. There are an infinite number of things we could potentially include in our training and racing. What we choose not to do is often just as important, if not more so, than what we choose to do. Quite frankly, sometimes there are more things that we choose not to do than we actually choose to do. In endurance sports, it's very easy to do too much too soon or to implement the wrong combination of elements in training and racing. When athletes are successful, we usually see what they do. We don't often consider the things that they didn't do that enabled them to be successful. Here are some common things that athletes might choose not to do that enable them to be successful. And this is not a comprehensive or exhaustive list of all the things an athlete may not choose to do, but this is a list of some things that I've seen athletes over the years choose not to do that have helped them be successful. One of the big things is that athletes don't choose to plan and execute workouts based on what they want. They plan workouts based on what they need. Another is that athletes don't choose to consume alcohol regularly. Another one, athletes choose not to stay up late and to shortchange their sleep. Another one is that they choose to forego training with athletes who are not training for the same goals that they are. Another thing that athletes don't do are group workouts that are not in alignment with their current ability level. And finally, the last example I'm going to give here is that athletes choose not to do other types of physical activity that may detract from their training workouts. So for instance, several years ago, I was coaching an elite para-triathlete and her family wanted to go ice skating and she opted out because the risk was so high that she might fall and get injured and that would destroy her dream of competing on the world level. What you choose not to do may very well have been a part of your recipe for success. Our current culture values making changes through addition rather than through subtraction. However, subtractive changes can yield very successful outcomes. In addition to thinking about what you may need to add or layer into your training, you should consider if there's something else that you should edit out. A common default thought process that many athletes have after a successful race day performance is this. They think that the method or process that led to that positive result was a sound and a good one. When something goes well in endurance sports, either in training or on race day, many athletes develop a confirmation bias, which is the tendency of people to favor information that strengthens their values or beliefs. In endurance sports, when an end result is what an athlete wants, the result itself confirms to the athlete that how they got to it was okay. And they don't necessarily seek to change their behaviors in the future because they expect that the same thing will work again. But this isn't always true. Sometimes we get away with something and sometimes we get lucky. A confirmation bias is very, very difficult to dislodge once it is affirmed, which is why it's so important to ask ourselves the question, did I get lucky or did I get away with something when we have a successful race day? Like we discussed earlier, there are certainly many times when athletes engage in sound practices and their choices to engage in those sound practices help yield successful outcomes for them. But there are also times when this is not true. Sometimes they get lucky. All athletes need to develop the self-awareness to discern what is a good habit or behavior from what is not. We all have blind spots, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of experience to be able to recognize them. When confronted about blind spots or about the truth that they might have gotten away with something, most people's first instinct will be to go on the defensive and to state why what they did wasn't the result of luck and wasn't them getting away with something. As you can imagine, it is very hard to identify our own blind spots. If this wasn't true, they wouldn't be blind spots. Engaging in thoughtful self-reflection after a successful race day can help you develop the self-awareness to more readily identify blind spots or when you get away with something. Working with a coach can also be useful for this purpose because a coach is a third-party observer, and that means that they can more readily identify things that you may not be able, or perhaps more accurately, want to see about yourself, about what you're doing in your training in racing. Part of the appeal of endurance sports is that there are an infinite number of goals we can set and things we can aim to achieve. Our work is never done, quote unquote. There are always other goals that can be set, and as a result, there's always a yearning to strive for more. As a result, even if we achieve one goal, and even if we achieve exactly what we hoped, athletes generally always have their head turned towards what possibilities might be next. There's always something else we can seek to achieve in the future. Thus, as part of a reflection of a race day when things went well, it's a good idea to ask yourself if there's anything you could have done differently or better in your training or on race day that might help you achieve future goals and be even more successful moving forward. It's also important to ask yourself what your goals for the future actually are. Remember, you should never have secret goals. You should always write down what your goals are and share them with the relevant people who are supporting you on your endurance sports journey, such as your spouse, your coach, or any close friends or training partners. The only way to achieve what you want is to say it out loud and to chart a course toward that target. If you don't specifically aim for a target, you'll almost certainly miss it. Then, ask yourself what you will be willing to do in training to achieve those goals. After tasting some success, you may be willing to change what you're doing in order to help unlock more of your potential. Often, we need proof that our investment of our time, our money, and our energy into training is worth it, and that includes the sacrifices we make for it along the way. A successful race day can show us that our investment has been worth it, thus inspiring us to invest further in our endurance sports goals. The hard days are not the only days that teach us something. While the disappointing days often teach us the hardest and perhaps the most memorable lessons, the days when things go as we hope or envision have something to teach us too. It's important to make sure you ask yourselves why things went well so you can carry those lessons forward with you to help chart a sound course to help you achieve any and all goals that you do set in the future. That was another episode of the Full Circle Podcast. Subscribe to the Full Circle Podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you like what you listen to, please be sure to leave us a rating and review, as this goes a long way in helping us reach others. The thoughts and opinions expressed on the Full Circle Podcast are those of the individual. As always, we love to hear from you and we value your feedback. Please send us an email at podcast@fullcircleendurance.com or visit us at fullcircleendurance.com/podcast. To find training plans, see what other coaching services we offer, or to join our community, please visit fullcircleendurance.com. I'm Coach Laura Henry. Thanks for listening.